and the brothers and sisters. And we make dua that inshallah this Ramadan will be the best Ramadan for all of us, inshallah. For people like us, Sister Aicha, we are now over 60, except Brother Hasrizal. He is still very young, I think. I think he's around 29 years old. I think so.
I wish. I'm almost 50 already.
Oh, okay. Alhamdulillah. So every time we meet Ramadan, we tell ourselves this might be the last Ramadan in our life. So anyway, let me just I was looking for Sister Aisha's resume, and I found out that Sister Aicha is an educator at heart, who takes the initiative to put forth inspirational programs for Muslims, alhamdulillah. Taught all ages of from children to adults in private classes and classroom settings, with an emphasis on learning disabilities. Okay, interesting. Current educational vocational emphasis is director of Integral International Schoolhouse Project.
That's old.
Okay, homeschooling, Muslim Mother Support Group, and administrating an online Tawheed course. So strong history in organizing, managing, and executing various programs, conferences, and research projects in different countries and languages. So I will stop there, and perhaps Sister Aicha would like to add a little bit more about yourself before we go into the topic.
Well, first, Barakallahu feek, Ustaz Amin, for inviting me. It's been a while, so alhamdulillah, it's really glad to be here. I'm really glad to be here again. This is very nice to see these meetings coming up again. It's very important as educators to support each other and know what other projects is. As you all know, education is like an art, so it just keeps evolving as we evolve as persons and as educators and as Muslims, alhamdulillah. So, Barakallahu feek for inviting me. My name is Aicha Dillman. I am originally from Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I'm a convert of 15, almost 16 years. But I've been living in Granada now for 16 years, ever since I converted, well, a little bit before I converted. And my educational background is a master's in religious studies, where I focused on psychology and religion. My master's thesis was Muslim women, of the biographies of Muslim women of Al-Andalus, which is another one of my specialties other than psychology and religion. I'm married. I have 4 children, and which I have been homeschooling now, and run basically like what a one-room schoolhouse is, where I help other families too. I teach other families, which has also turned into what is now the Averroes American School, not Integral International anymore. We've chosen the name Averroes American School, which hopefully you guys will see as to why by the end of this presentation. It would probably make very good sense. It's a very suitable name. And so it is a project to open up the very first school founded by Muslims living in Spain. There are over 2 million of us here, and there are 0 schools that we have founded. So that's where I'm at in life.
Averroes is the name of an ulama, a scientist, isn't it?
Yes, Ibn Rushd.
Ibn Rushd.
Yeah. We chose the Latin name because I think it's more common. People will, both Muslims and non-Muslims will know him better that way.
Okay.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So let's see. So this is the liberal arts and Islamic curriculum is what I want to present today. It's what I consider to be a symbiotic relationship. I started this presentation with the idea that most people probably don't know what a liberal arts education is. So I'm sorry if some of you guys do. Just bear with me. And it's a basic overview because liberal arts in and of itself, you can do are there many books written about it? Islamic Curriculum, many books written about it. So this is a just basic overview as to the history and the relationship between those two and why they are so interrelated and what I consider to be a symbiotic relationship. So the second slide is the contents and what we're going to discuss. The symbiotic relationship, I'll explain that. What are the liberal arts, the definition and the historical origin context, the history of liberal arts and an Islamic curriculum, going through Plato, Aristotle, Marcianus Capella, the official 7 liberal arts, the trivium, the quadrivium. And through all that, I will be interweaving it a lot with Islamic context, especially in the context of Al-Andalus, because they used a liberal arts curriculum in their madrasas. And so that will bring me to the commonalities, the things that we have in common between the liberal arts and Islamic curriculum, and why it is so adequate to use. And like I said, next I'll be using some examples from Al-Andalus. And then going back in order to move forward, it will just be kind of tying this all in because this is all based off of the current school project that we have for Averroes American School. And then my conclusion. Alrighty. The next slide.
So you've got 40 minutes, huh, sister?
Excuse me?
You've got 40 minutes.
I have 14 minutes?
40.
Oh, okay. Bismillah. Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I got cut off when I was adding more things into the presentation this morning. So with the hour difference, so I'll make it in 40 minutes, inshallah. So Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, so the symbiotic relationship. So we are more connected than we think. The purpose here is to establish the developmental and historical introduction of liberal arts into the Islamic curriculum context. So the liberal arts and Islamic education have a symbiotic or complementary relationship regarding the intellectual endeavors, especially in the context of educating a holistic individual, which encompasses the holistic aspect encompasses religion, moral values, leadership, critical thinking, and high academic quality. A major contribution to the development of this symbiotic relationship is what I attribute in general to the remarkable ability of Arab Islamic civilization to embrace and revitalize the bountiful contributions of past and local cultures. With my students this year, I'm teaching the history of Al-Andalus, and as that is something that I have seen that the Arab Islamic civilization, as they were conquering, were very capable of doing. They would conquer a new area, and they just wouldn't burn everything down. It was very much so trying to move in a harmonious manner forward, and they would take what was in accordance with Islam and what was good, and then they would leave what obviously wasn't. So I contribute that to part of the symbiotic relationship. So the historical relationship between liberal arts and Islamic curriculum is complex and multifaceted, spanning centuries and influenced by various cultural, political, and intellectual factors. While the liberal arts tradition originated in ancient Greece and Rome, it intersected with Islamic civilization during the Middle Ages through processes of translation, transmission, and culture exchange. During the Islamic Golden Age from the 8th to the 14th centuries, when Islamic civilization flourished in the regions such as the Middle East, North Africa, Spain, and Central Asia, there was a vibrant intellectual environment characterized by the translation of classical Greek, Roman, and Persian texts into Arabic. An example that we have here is Muslims translated the original Greek texts in Al-Andalus and then contributed to their further development of these sciences. We have Ibn Rushd. Averroes was born in 1126 in Cordoba, and he was one of the main translators and commentators of Plato, and especially he loved Aristotle. So that is how it was generally introduced. In general, the flow of knowledge at this time came from from Baghdad, and it came all the way over into the Iberian Peninsula, into Al-Andalus, and then that's how it started in the early centuries. And then they would translate these works, or they were already translated, and continue and move forward and develop these theories a bit further. So these translations played a crucial role in the preservation and transmission of knowledge from antiquity, which can also be understood the science of the ancients, which is the Greek sciences, to the medieval world. So they did the translations, and then it was working its way, the old knowledge is working its way into the medieval world, which in turn, especially in the context of Al-Andalus, is how these sciences were introduced to modern Europe. So, because what happened is later, as the Christians from the north in the Iberian Peninsula started conquering, especially after taking Toledo in 1085, Cordoba in 1236, and Seville in 1248, they finally had access to these Muslim libraries as they were conquering. And this is when important translations of Arabic texts and commentaries of Greek works were then translated into Latin and eventually Castilian and Spanish, leading to the modern knowledge as we understand it in the 21st century. So that's what I really want you to get. The takeaway from all of this is how interconnected we really truly are. Most people consider the liberal arts to be something of the Greeks, and then you have Islamic curriculum. The more you study history, the more you find how interconnected we are. I think we can see this in kind of something that's been kind of a crave, or a new wave. I don't know, at least here in Spain and the United States, how people are doing all these DNA tests to find out who they are. And you can see white people and they're like, oh, I'm like 12% black. So I think that the history of the liberal arts and the Islamic curriculum represents the intertwined relationship of different civilizations producing amazing educational curriculums. So now the next one is the number 6, Ustaz Amin, if you're following the numbers. Liberal arts, the Nia. What was the intention of these liberal arts? There are many forms of liberal arts throughout the centuries, but today we will focus on its origins in order to understand what its original Nia was, because it's very congruent with the Islam, as I will show here, inshallah, that it's very congruent with the Islamic education's Nia. So, and to understand that, instead of going into what is the liberal arts in the United States or in Europe or in Ireland or in Australia, let's just get right down to the very roots in the original context, even though it doesn't reflect what it exactly is today. Well, in some ways. Let's see. So the next one is number 7, the historical definition. So the word itself, liberal arts, has Latin origins, and it was during the era of classical antiquity, starting with Plato. I'll get into that in the next slide. So the society, as far as education, was divided into 2 types. Liber, in and of itself, and the word liberal, means free or unrestricted, emancipating the mind from the ego, traditions, and etc. It doesn't mean, the term liberal does not have any sort of political connotation as it does today, which refers to the type of movement of this multiculturalism, everything is okay, all Hakuna Matata is what I call it, theory. So what it is, if you're going on the next slide for number 8, is originally liberal arts education was meant for only the ruling or civil servant class. It was not an education open to the masses. It could have something to do with the ego and being arrogant, but what the purpose of their focus was very clear and specific, and it was directed to a particular segment of the population with the end goal to create spiritual and ethical leaders that would be civil servants. So you wanted to take people and give them a good education based with ethics, religious morals, and other such things, so that they would be future leaders that would be prepared to govern. And for example, so what kind of professions were they being prepared for? They were able to participate in public debates, defend oneself, and serve in court and on juries, and perform military service. And in the context of Al-Andalus, one of the examples I'm going to give, that they were the caliphs. This is what they used to educate their children, along with Quranic and Hadith studies and the Islamic sciences, of course. For this reason, leadership training was also, and still is, an integral part of a liberal arts education. All right, number 9, the history. The liberal arts has started out more like a movement, I would say. So you have Plato, and he writes Plato's Republic around 375 BC. And this is the actual beginnings of a liberal arts curriculum. But like I said, it's more on a theoretical level. He gets into some categorization, but not so much. So because the term liberal arts wasn't actually coined until the 14th century. So for him, the main goal of education in general in this book was to create a utopian society with spiritual, virtuous, and moral leaders that were active in civil life by establishing what they called an art of education that addresses the entire being, thereby turning the soul towards good and truth. And here's a quote from Plato, and he says, "True education will have the greatest tendency to civilize and humanize them, civil servants, in their relations to one another and to those who are under their protection." So they were being trained and taught a very high level of morals and ethics, because they needed to be able to protect others. Okay, the next slide, number 10. So Plato, his basic principles as they relate to Islam. So I found while I was reading Plato's Republic, has many different, I haven't read the whole book because it has many different layers to it. I've read most of it. But I found some things that resonated also with a lot of the Islamic, what I would consider goals of an Islamic education. So one he mentions much is very important, is habit formation. It's very important in training the soul and grounding it in a virtuous character. And this is obviously, for example, why in Islam we start teaching and training our kids at the age of 7 to pray. Obviously they're not required, but we start early because this is very important for habit formation. Basically, I'm not sure if it was Plato or Aristotle, forgive me, but I do remember this quote. They say that you are the sum of your habits. So if you have good ones, hopefully you're a good person. If you have bad ones, you got some things to work on. So, and another piece of advice that he gives in this book is that beginning at a young age is important because this is when children are most impressionable. And Plato even established a censorship list of writers and poets, while encouraging mothers to only tell their children stories or poems that model virtuous thoughts. And this reminded me a lot of the hadith about the fitra. That children are born Muslims, but depending on their parents, they can raise them to be Christians, Zoroastrians, or even the translation in Spanish is different, fire worshipers, but I don't think that's right. But this is a well-known hadith. So he recognized and knew that the soul, or what we call in Islam, the fitra of this child is malleable. You can mold it. And so he, at that time, started filtering out and giving advice to mothers on what they should be reciting, or because they did a lot of poetry recitation about stories of different gods, because they had multiple gods. So, and he also said here, he said, and along those lines, he says, God is to be represented as he truly is, good. So at that time, in this cultural context, of course, they also believed in different gods, astaghfirullah, but they were just he was trying to clean things up. That the stories were of destructive gods, they fought each other, jealous gods. So he was trying to say just only good stories that represented moral thoughts. So obviously, along the lines of shirk, we are in agreement with him. But the idea that we are trying to raise moral children with good habits is is where we do agree, at least on a theoretical approach. And on a theoretical approach. Alrighty, now the next one, history, Aristotle. So at this point, liberal arts was more theoretical with little structure. And then Aristotle, who was a student of Plato, starts to work began to formalize education into categories. So he starts creating the first developmental models of liberal arts. He's starting with logic, rhetoric, and ethics. So logic was the formal reasoning and argumentation. Rhetoric is the study of the rules of persuasive communication, while emphasizing character, emotion, and reason. And then he added the category ethics, which I also find to be very congruent with the goals of an Islamic education. We can see that in modern education, a lot of the goals of modern education is progressivism, multiculturalism, all-inclusiveness, which is a different set of ethics. But not only that, it also focuses on vocation. So you're going to school to get a job. Whereas centuries ago, this was meant to really develop a person's ethics, this liberal arts. Character development and their character development. All right, next one. So then eventually the trivium is established. The liberal arts covers only 3 subjects at this time: grammar, rhetoric, and logic, which is collectively known as the trivium. Tri is for 3. So I'll go into a lot more detail into that just now. And then centuries later, around the 5th century in Northern Africa, we're not really sure where he was born, whether it's Tunisia or Algeria in Northern Africa. Marcianus Capella is born and writes his book called The Marriage of Philology and Mercury. He considered those to be like the parents of liberal arts. And it's a significant piece of literature that served as the defining moment in which he delineates the 7 branches, the official 7 branches of the liberal arts, which was the most influential educational text during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, not just for non-Muslims, also in the Islamic context. And I'll go into that soon. So the 7 liberal arts, as outlined by Marcianus Capella, are one, what I said before was the trivium. The trivium is the art of language. It is what provides the critical thinking skills. Because a lot of times nowadays people talk about critical thinking skills, but a lot of times I feel that it's just a buzzword because kids aren't literally critical thinking. It's more like learn as much as you can, pass the test, vomit it all out on the test, and then move on to the next unit. So there isn't much critical thinking there's not much space given to critical thinking. And the liberal arts defines that very clearly, very, very clearly. And grammar, dialectic or logic, and the rhetoric. So grammar is the study of language and its structure. But like how I teach it here and what I've seen, it's not like your regular grammar. We actually diagram the sentences. So if you say the dog is small, the is the article, dog is the subject, is the verb, and then small is the predicate adjective. And each one has to be drawn on a line because you really truly need to have this grammar very well internalized, because the next step as you move into middle school is logic, the study of reasoning and argumentation. And if you don't have the right grammatical structure, if you don't know how to make a sentence, you're not going to be able to make an argument. That's what I would call logical. So we focus very much so on the grammar, which leads to logic and making your arguments and putting them in order. And then after that, around high school, you start doing rhetoric. So which is the art of persuasion, speaking, and writing. The art of persuasive speaking and writing, sorry. So I call it psychological. It's a psychological component because it's where in order to get your thought across, if you want to make da'wah to someone, for example, you need to know who your audience is. For example, if I'm talking to someone I don't know, in Kenya, or may not be the same conversation, may not be the same form of da'wah if I'm talking to someone in Brazil, because each one has their own context and what they're looking for and what they need to listen to. And I find that very beautiful, and that's the beauty of these language sciences. And as we move into the next slide, this is how I understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually trying to say, that indeed we have sent it down as an Arabic Quran that you might understand. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was, I guess, making da'wah, I guess you could say, I don't know if you could even say that. But because it was sent to the Arabs in their own language that they could not only understand, but also appreciate the detailed grammar or intricate poetic rhymes and nuances throughout the ayahs of the Quran. Which is why also in the next slide, he even challenges people. Okay, so if this is so easy to produce, then why don't you produce something like this? Because, I mean, as you guys know, as you study Arabic or speak Arabic, and you start reading the Quran, the nuances and the grammar and the rhymes and the rhythms and the multiple layered meanings behind the words is tremendous. And if you don't have a strong background in language sciences, you're not going to get that. So for the liberal arts, their language science was Latin, and for the Muslims, it's Arabic. And so going on to the next slide, the commonalities, the language sciences, overall, this is what I consider to be one of the most important commonalities between the liberal arts and the Islamic curriculum, is the cultivation of the human being through the language sciences, with the end goal of having a better understanding of one's respective religious texts and their creator. So even in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those names are very similar. Some of them are very similar. And as you get into more of the language sciences, you get into the particularities of each of those words, and you can understand what those differences are. And then you can attune your dua when you're calling to one of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names in a particular situation. So, and then another comment here is that the first word of the Quran was iqra, meaning to read or recite. So as Muslims, we know that language is a fundamental and foundational obligation in education. Hamza Kamali explains that the ultimate goal of studying the language sciences was to become like those ancient Arabs and detect the miraculous eloquence of the Quran and the meaning of the Quran and the Sunnah firsthand. It is a tremendous, powerful spiritual experience starting to learn the Arabic as a non-native speaker. The very little bit of grammar that I know, as I'm getting to learn it, the nuances within the grammar and the ayahs and the Quran and the eloquence only is like considered yet another sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the greatness in the book that he wrote and that he sent down, which is why he said, go ahead, you try to make something similar, because you can't. Language sciences for me shows those signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the liberal arts also regards the written word as the foundational building block from which all educational extends, beginning with an intense understanding of grammar coupled with moral and spiritual development. So it's not just grammar for grammar's sake. Liberal arts never said just learn grammar for grammar's sake. No, it's always connected to a moral and spiritual development, even in the liberal arts context. As we go down to the next one. So we went through the trivium, which is the basic foundation, and that's what we teach in our school, because my focus is elementary, but as my son's getting bigger, I'm now moving into the university, into the high school, but still. The main focus is the elementary. Now here's the quadrivium. So these are advanced studies, and we have geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and harmony, music. Which a lot of liberal arts schools have been downplaying these last few years, at least decades. It's not generally a main emphasis. And it's not really, the music in and of itself is not an instrumental, acquisition. They're not trying to teach how to play an instrument. The harmony of music in this context is often the history of music, but especially because all the quadrivium deals with, it's like the science of mathematics. You have the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. That's the science of language. So now the quadrivium, which is much more advanced, is the science of math. So you want to know the study of shapes for geometry. And then, okay, now let's take that geometry, because before you do astronomy, you need to study geometry so that you can understand how those geometric shapes move across the sky. Okay? And then you study arithmetic, which is just the basic mathematical operations. And then you try to figure out how those numbers move across a page to make a sound. That's the harmony that they're referring to, the science of it, behind it. And I didn't see, as I've been reading through the madrasas and things like that, I just to make a comment on that, I didn't see that the madrasas ever taught music or harmony. So I will never say that I think liberal arts is a copy paste from liberal arts to Islamic curriculum. We have a lot in common as far as our end goals, but it's not a copy paste. But I present it as it should be, as what it is, the liberal arts. So the seven liberal arts quadrivium is, like I said before, considerably more difficult than the trivium. The quadrivium was used to prepare its students for more serious study of philosophy and theology. And the aim of liberal arts education was always to produce a person who is virtuous, ethical, knowledgeable in many fields, and highly articulate. Now we can see in the context of Al-Andalus that these seven liberal arts were considered essential for a well-rounded education in the medieval period. They formed the basis of higher education and were seen as disciplines that cultivated the intellect and prepared individuals for further study in philosophy, theology, law, and other fields. That didn't really... Okay, one second. So what we're looking for here is one of the book that we're studying this year on the history of Al-Andalus is a book written by Maria Rosa Manocal, and it's called Ornament of the World. I actually read it in the university, and I'm teaching it to my son and my other student that's also in high school. And the first time I read the book, I hadn't even realized what she was talking about. I didn't even pick up on this because I didn't know the trivium and the quadrivium at that time. But she is commenting at this time period at 955. So this is, to give you guys a bit of a historical context, this is shortly after Abdurrahman III has declared himself the official caliphate, being of the Umayyad descendant. And so she's German, she's a nun, and she's commenting on the beautifulness of Cordoba. She says, the brilliant ornament of the world shone in the West, a noble city newly known for the military prowess that is Hispanic colonizers had brought. Cordoba was its name, and it was wealthy and famous and known for its pleasures and resplendent in all things, and especially for its seven streams of wisdom, the trivium and quadrivium, and as much for its constant victories. So this is just proof that shows that this was part of the madrasa curriculum in Al-Andalus. And here we have another example in the next slide. Abdurrahman II, his father Al-Hakam, took care of his Abdurrahman II, educating him, making him learn the Quran, and appointing for him teachers in Arabic language and literature. So as I'm talking about liberal arts, that's what I'm focusing more on today. But the religious sciences were always the first sciences that they started teaching their children. Always, always, always. Even logic doesn't start till middle school, and rhetoric until high school. And the quadrivium is not even until, geometry is not even, and astronomy is not until high school. So always the foundational first years of any sort of Islamic curriculum is Quran, Hadith, and other types of religious sciences. So this is how he started. And then he introduced him gradually in the most elevated sciences until he succeeded in the knowledge of wisdom and in the reading of the treatises of the ancients, which would be the Greek sciences, like philosophy and astronomy, especially. And he sent to Iraq. So Al-Hakam sent to Iraq the Al-Jaziran Abbas B with a substantial amount of money to search for and copy ancient books, and he brought him the Kitab al-Zij, the calendar, the Kunun, and the Sindhin, and the Arkan, and the Musla. I'm sure I'm just butchering those words. And the rest of treatises on philosophy and science, books on medicine, and others of the ancients as well. And Abd al-Rahman was the first to introduce them in Al-Andalus and made them known to its inhabitants. So this is another example of how knowledge was being passed. So from Baghdad, they would send someone there, and they would come back with these books. He studied them. He himself studied them together with the Islamic treaties, obtaining a thorough knowledge and refining his natural talents and the joy. We actually have a madrasa. It's the only one that we have in all the history of Al-Andalus. Basically, how education was transmitted at that time was still through the masjids or between elite families. So here we see something that would be people that would eventually work as ministers, give counsel to the emir, and other sorts of jobs. So the Madrasa Yusufiya was founded in 1349 by Yusuf I. And the reason that there are no other actual madrasas throughout of the almost 8 centuries that Islam was in the Iberian Peninsula is because there was a lot of internal conflict, a lot of fitna. And this was a relatively calm historical period, and plenty of money was there. So they put money into that. Many people came in. They say even in the scientists of the philosophers of that time studied there. The best of the best were studying there. And what happened is in the beginning, when Andalus was first getting its feet off the ground, so to speak, in the first few centuries, they brought a lot of the knowledge over from Baghdad. And then now what we see at the end of this is that these scholars, they now have scholars of their own in Al-Andalus, and there's very little petitioning of works from Baghdad. So they started just producing their own works and philosophies and education and academias. So one of the subjects that they taught was theology, law, medicine, astronomy, logic, mathematics, including geometry and mechanics. So this is what I wanted to brush up on, but with the hour time change, I don't know how this all came out. So bismillah. So some of the commonalities I did want to develop better, but I didn't get a chance. So they respect both of us, both the liberal arts and an Islamic curriculum. Respect for, both have a very deep respect for the importance of a profound understanding of language, grammar, phonics, poetry, etc. The education is always founded on religious ethics, and the teaching of logic is just not so you can win an argument. It's in order to further internalize the truth of the Quran and the Sunnah or biblical teachings, because later on the liberal arts was adopted by the Catholic Church, and that was their logic. They used logic in order to prove the existence of God and other religious tenets. So just to kind of tie it in real quick here. So how does this look when you're dealing with the 21st century? It feels so rooted in ancient Greeks and Al-Andalus. So how does it look here in the 21st century in small Granada, me with my one-room schoolhouse? So when you go back to, so we are going back in order to move forward. But interestingly enough, I didn't know I was going back. I just found that intuitively what I thought would be in a really good education for my children. And this led to the language sciences, based in the liberal arts. So in an elementary school program, what do we focus on? We focus on grammar, poetry memorization. I mean, first, let me say, we have I'm focusing, like I said, on the liberal arts part. We have the Islamic curriculum in place too. In a liberal arts context, we focus on the grammar, poetry, memorization, reading of the classics is really, really, really emphasized. You have Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, anything by Mark Twain, Little House in the Big Woods. What's her name? Laura Ingalls, right? Laura Ingalls. She wrote Little House on the Prairie. She was actually originally from Wisconsin, which is where I'm from. So there's a really long list of extensive classics, and we are very particular about making sure when we buy, what is the publication date of these books, because after the 1940s, there is a very noted decline in as far as their educational level. So these books have been adapted to that level of people that don't have the same syntax as before. So the books that we buy and purchase and use in the class have been, most of them have been published before 1940. So that the kids are still receiving a high level of syntax and grammatical exposure and high vocabulary exposure. So reading the classics, we do science. Alhamdulillah, we have actually a Christian science book system, and which they consider God to be the original scientist. So everything we do in science is all still going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all of science is nothing more than a sign of his creation, and Latin, because we would do Latin because it's almost half of the roots of the English language, and English language, I think in general, is a pretty easy language, but on a phonetics level, it's one of the most complicated because it's just a mix of everything. It's Latin, it's Greek, it's German, it's Old English, it's French, it's Arabic, it's everything in there. So it has such a wide variety of languages, which each of them have their own phonetic origins, which causes a lot of issues when you're trying to teach how to say the words. So Latin is really good. Plus, if any of the students in any time in the future would like to do any sort of advanced studies, like be a lawyer or medicine, which is all the vocabulary is Latin pretty much, they already have a really strong foundation, and it's just a really good language to learn. As far as like, they have the verbs have masculine and feminine. It's not like English where a verb is just a verb, and the nouns are also masculine and feminine. So what was I going to say then? So that's our curriculum, how that can be applied, and that's at the elementary level. I wanted to say something else, but I can't quite remember. But so we'll just get to the conclusion here. But so although the liberal arts, as applied in an Islamic context, is not a copy and paste curriculum, these efforts reflect a recognition of the shared humanistic values and intellectual aspirations that underpin both traditions, as well as a commitment to fostering pluralism, tolerance, and intellectual engagement in an increasingly interconnected world. And please forgive me, I do not have my works cited page. That's what I was going to do this last hour. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khairan jaza, Sister Aicha. I think maybe I'm speaking on my behalf, and definitely, shall I say, bewildered with all the information, the research, the citations, mashallah. And this is definitely something I thought, without you clarifying it, I thought it is definitely Western and, nothing to do with Islam. But now I think, as I've mentioned, it is definitely very related and common. There are lots of commonalities between liberal arts and Islamic education. Wallah, jazakallah khair. Shall I now open to Q&A, opinions from that? Shall we start with our chairman, Prof? He did his PhD in Wisconsin. Okay.
I went to UW.
Which one? Madison?
Medicine, yeah.
Yeah, mashallah. I remember, I think you had told me that. You lived there for some time, yes?
Yeah, 5 years.
Mashallah. Mashallah. You survived the cold. Mabruk.
Yeah, I survived the cold.
Mabruk.
Now I miss the cold
Oh, you do? Being in Malaysia, huh?
because it's very hot in Malaysia now.
Yeah, mashallah.
Especially in the place I live. Just a short question.
Yes.
Sort of, I hope I'm not missing the point. The point is you are trying to relate between two traditions, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to bring the bridge and show the commonality.
And commonalities, yeah. But wouldn't any differences in the philosophical foundations of both traditions? Do you see any conflict? Do you see any, or you see most common? That's my question. Whether you see, because there are two approach. I mean, right now I'm trying to look at looking at models based on Islam, not Islamizing the models. If you can get what I mean. So wouldn't it be a bit conflict between two traditions there?
Absolutely. That's why I said that I don't think liberal arts is a copy paste. I think where I most the most amount of difficulties, even as I'm reading Plato, is when I hear him talk about all the different gods. It just pains my heart. But I know that the commonalities that we have, I think, are important to study and bring out. And I do not feel that Islam has taken liberal arts and made it, and it's like you had said, it's been an Islamization. I really understand it to be, we have these things in common because it's just good education. Language sciences is just good education. And it wasn't the Muslims that developed the language sciences. So it's just, to me, that just is the foundation. And so I don't, in that sense, I don't find any problems. Where where you get into some issues is later on. At the elementary level, it's very basic. It gets more when you get into the logic, because it was adapted because then it gets into the philosophy and the philosophers and Greek philosophy, and there's where I just say, okay, we'll just move over to the Islamic scholars that have worked their logic, because logic is yet an extremely important step. Because what we have nowadays, because logic used to be a normal part of the curriculum, in an Islamic curriculum, not just in the Al-Andalus context, in Turkey, that was just given. Right now, I'm looking at programs, even in Islamic sciences, in that I would like to sign up for in England, and they teach logic and rhetoric. It's logical to teach logic, right? So, where Islam says, well, yeah, but we're not going to teach that aspect of it. Now, I'm not a logic scholar, so I really can't comment in detail, in a detailed way, but I do know that there are differences of how the logic should be taught. The Catholic Church used logic to prove the Trinity. We obviously would not do that.
Yeah.
But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells us repeatedly to reflect. Think. Well, how if you don't know how to think? How are you going to reflect if you're just looking at a sunset and you say, that's beautiful, subhanallah? These are tools. These are what they call tools of learning, basic tools of learning. Language sciences, logic. These are basic tools of learning that we all need. So using logic to prove the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are these logical conclusions? And back in the days when they used to teach logic in all the schools, it was just standard. They've taken it out. So what happens is we're just subject to we read all these publicities and we see all these different things around us, and we're constantly moved, like, oh, I want this or I want that. And there's no filter. Your logic would say, because one of the first things they start teaching in logic is false publicities, or how they triggered your emotions. So once you start to understand that that's part of their marketing strategy, you say, well, that's just a fallacy. So done. I don't need Nike shoes that cost 300 euros when I know they make them for 5 euros in China. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, if you still want them, you can get them if you can, but just saying at least they have that logic put in place to filter things out. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, more or less. Yes.
Alhamdulillah, jazakallah.
What I'm worried is that philosophers are very strict about the accuracy of terminology, the accuracy of basics, because the implication of what we do today is going to be come in another 50 years or something like that. We miss the point here. We'll miss the point. A big difference will happen in the coming years. So basically, the philosophers and the people in Islamic had a look at the Al-Quran and the Hadith in order to sort of basis will be on Al-Quran to build that knowledge, to build that logic, whereas the other side is not based on the Al-Quran or Hadith, it's based on their own logic and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
So as you said, the truth will be the same. I mean, but the foundations are different. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. The sources are different.
Can be different. So what I guess what I'm trying to say is that be careful to look at it. Sometimes we get smart. We get what do you call it? Kelabu, gitu. The kaburi, the blood by things that really is the basic foundation of knowledge. That's what I'm saying.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. Yep.
Okay.
There's some basic ideas of logic. I look at logic as a tool of learning, an essential tool of learning. It's not something we can say that's only of the philosophers. That's just education, period. So as Muslims, well, for example, also in another context, like what a very important part of liberal arts is to teach ethics. Okay. So, but Muslims, we have our own system of ethics, and it can oftentimes be very subtle because you go into whatever, have TikTok, but if you go into some of these like short videos and there's all this like serene music in the background, oh yes, and then all of a sudden this amazing philosophical quote comes up and you're like, oh, that's beautiful. This makes so much sense, right? But those are the subtleties where I don't agree with. So what we study, at least in my school right now, while that I'm teaching, when we're teaching ethics, I'm teaching them from the book by Imam Al-Bukhari, Al-Adab Al-Mufrad. Okay. And I like how he starts it. The first adab is respect your parents. Okay. Whereas I don't know what the first step for the liberal arts program would be when you're teaching ethics. I don't know if it would be like, don't be racist, don't do this, but for us, the first one is respect your parents, and he goes into extreme amount of detail. So that's where I can see the subtle differences where I don't agree with. But teaching ethics, have to teach ethics. So why don't we make it part of the curriculum and one of the things that we're obliged to do? And that way, when the kids do see these little quick snippet videos of supposed tremendous wisdom, from some football player, about supposed wisdom, the kids have their foundation already in Adab al-Mufrad, the manners and the morality of Imam Al-Bukhari, so those are the distinctions.
Brother Hasrizan, go ahead.
Oh yes, thank you, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Doctor, for the excellent presentation. I actually have so many questions in my mind. I try to put in order. When I heard your presentation just now, it reminds me of the criticism that Arthur Bester, a professor in liberal arts, towards John Dewey when he came up with a progressive educational model.
Mm.
So Alberto criticized, saying that progressive education is like diluting the knowledge, making things so much easier, and focusing only on preparing the students for their life and not for the intellectual um, exercise.
Hmm.
So my first question to you is, in terms of your model of liberal arts education, how do you see your model align or not align with the 21st century education framework that current education is working on? Because in the 21st century education framework, there is like a combination of both. We want students to have this critical thinking, to be very creative in discussion, but at the same time, the teachers have some dilemma in balancing between making learning active and enjoyable, meaningful for students, but they need to compromise on the content, because you cannot cover so much content when students need to be more active in those kind of activities. That is my first question. I'm not sure if I make sense or not with my questions.
Brother Hasrita,
Yeah.
in view of the time, we have only about say about
Yes.
5 minutes. So maybe we can share with you the WhatsApp number for Sister Anisha and Brother Hasrizal, and then you can continue with your discussions after this. But Sister Anisha, can you just respond to the first question by Brother Hasrizal?
Um, I was following your question, and then I wasn't quite sure. I kind of lost exactly what your point is. You're trying to say, if they have a liberal arts education, will they be prepared vocationally? Maybe is one part, I believe, and two, is it interesting enough for kids to follow?
Yeah, I mean, to keep it simple, when we think about philosophy and enhancing the ability to exercise the mantic of students, we might thinking about classical books, heavy material for education. But at the same time, we also want to make students active, more discussion and those kind of things. So how do you find the balance between the two?
Developmental level, cognitively speaking, and then it gets more detailed in high school. So, and then as far as vocationally speaking, in comparison to what you're looking at in other schools, children who come out with a liberal arts education are way more prepared to deal with university life. My students will be prepared for writing when they go into university. They'll just start. Whereas other students are not prepared to write because they don't even have the basic grammar. You know what I'm saying? So as far as that's concerned, these are what are considered basic tools of learning. So focusing on other subjects is nice, and everyone has their pedagogical approach, and maybe this is not for other families, and I don't think it is for everyone. I mean, but I do believe these are basic learning tools that prepare them so much more for university life than a regular school. We focus tremendously on writing once they hit 6th or 7th grade, and now 8th grade, and plenty of classical reading material. And others that have gone to a liberal arts school, for example, I have a friend of mine, she's Moroccan, but she was raised
Frozen. Noise.
And there is a line. In the meantime, Brother Haziza, can you share your WhatsApp number in the chat?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Sister Aisha. You were frozen for a few seconds.
Yeah. So it prepares them for university amazingly. I think when kids are young, they need. And those are the absolute important learning tools. Now, at least the trivium, you know, and there's a theory too by Dorothy Sayers that she says, at least if they have the trivium, the grammar, the logic, and the rhetoric, they're set. You know, if you decide you don't want to do any more, the quadrivium is just even more so. More education, definitely preparing you for university. And it focuses on geometry, which is what my son, inshallah, I'll be teaching him next year.
Okay.
Frozen again?
Okay. I think we have a connection problem there. So probably it's too early in the morning in Canada. So the lines are not very not really proper yet. So Aicha, are you with us? You are frozen again for the second time.
Okay. So, so as far as like, is it interesting enough? I mean, this is my own personal understanding. I think that there's a fine line where you're educating and where education has also reached nowadays where it's almost kind of like constant playtime in order to maintain their attention. Whereas, to be honest, in my experience, when you're really teaching kids and they're getting these tools, I don't have my kids bored. They're not bored anymore. I mean, my son will complain because he's like, it's so much homework. I'm like, well, then concentrate and get your work done in the class and you'll have less homework, right? So, but there are ways that we do grammar that make it fun, and there are games. We have games all the time. The kids color pictures and they do everything else. The science program is astounding. It's based off of, the name escapes me. It's based off of, it's an English woman. She did homeschooling at the beginning of the 20th century. Charlotte Mason, I believe. Yes. And she's based off of a very interactive program. So the kids do we're studying astronomy this year. They built their own astrolabe, their own telescope, every single day. So where maybe grammar might feel a little, or writing might feel a little more tedious, the science program is top notch. So I hope that helps.
Sister Aicha, shukran jazilan wa barakallahu fikum. Jazakumullah khairan jazak for the excellent sharing and presentation. And inshallah, we need to add that you will be always successful in your endeavor, even though you have a one-room school, is it?
Yes. Oh, yeah, I should have put it in the slides that it's the Averroes American School. So, yes, inshallah. May Allah make that easy for us.
Shukran jazilan. So, and also to all brothers and sisters, jazakumullah khair for being with us, and inshallah, we will meet again in our next ICEE webinar. Jazakumullah khair. Shukran jazilan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those who are muttaqin, inshallah. Bless us with taqwa in this month.
Abu Obaid, can you show us there? Abu Obaid? Where are you from? Well, okay.
Okay, jazakumullah.
Well, I want to say thank you very much to everyone too for your wonderful questions. I really like to hear your guys' response and what you hear. Excuse me?
From Nepal.
Oh, Nepal.
MashaAllah.
Alhamdulillah. So we will end this webinar, and inshallah we'll meet again inshallah in the next webinar. Barakallah.
Inshallah. Barakallahu feek, Ustaz Amin.
Barakallah. Alhamdulillah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. إن الذين آمنوا وصلى الحكيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Salam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum everyone.